Welcome back, everyone. Our next panel invites two people who are self-employed and living with episodic disabilities. At the end of their presentation, there will be approximately 5 minutes for questions and answers. Kate Welsh is a queer, disabled artist, community activist, and educator. Their work focuses on the impacts of ableism and oppression on mental health. Kate is currently a disability affirming mental health counselor and facilitates workshops on a variety of topics. Salima Pujani is a socially engaged artist and access activator passionate about creating dignified creative practices and environments. She draws on her artistic practice with her awareness and lived experience of systemic issues such as racism and ableism to develop experiences alongside individuals and organizations that are welcoming, creative, and respectful. Her training is in journalism, communications, and social work with a particular interest in the intersection between the arts and care work.
Welcome, Kate and Salima. Kate, if you would like to go first, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kate. I use they or she pronouns, and I am a disabled queer person. Basically, what my bio said. So I don't actually have any slides, but I have a few things that I want to talk about. Maybe talk about a bit about my journey to self-employment. And I do actually want to leave room for Q&A because I think that is really important. So I'd rather talk shorter and do more engagement with with the folks in this webinar. So I've been chronically ill most of my life. Since I was 8 or 9. And then when I was a teenager, I was in and out of the hospital, and sometimes going to school, sometimes not. I did end up graduating from high school and was able to, my episodic disability or chronic health condition stabilized for a little bit. And during university, I went to York, and during university, part of the reason, I went to York, and part of the reason was because I needed, so I grew up in the States and I needed to go to a university that didn't have a SAT requirement because being chronically ill, I didn't actually study for it, and I wasn't able to study for it. And my marks were okay in high school, but nothing spectacular because I was constantly MIA because of being in the hospital. I also in high school went through lots of doctors trying to figure out, quote unquote, what was wrong with me or what my diagnosis was. And now, almost 25 years later, I still don't have a diagnosis. So growing up, I really hid my chronic illness and disability from my peers, and even family members. I really didn't talk to a lot of people about it. And then so during university, I was able to take part-time classes, take classes in the summer. I worked part-time jobs during school, and this kind of mishmash of things worked really well for me because I could kind of navigate my body while also navigating the world and flexibility. After university, I just worked contract to contract, part-time employment. I never had benefits. And I always had to pay for things out of pocket, like physio and acupuncture and massage, which were really important to me because I needed these things to stay well. And during this time, I actually didn't even try to get a full-time job because my internalized ableism was so high that I thought I would never be able to. Um, and I thought that because I was never able to have a full-time job, I would never be able to have secure and stable employment, because the only secure and stable employment I saw was full-time. But I needed flexibility to attend appointments and do self-care and things like that. I did end up working a full-time job once in my life for 3 months at a job I loved. It was amazing. But it taught me that I cannot work a full-time job in the typical way of how other people work full-time jobs. So after that, I was like pretty determined to pave a way for myself to do the type of things that I wanted to do without having to ever work a full-time job. Then I ended up getting my master's. So between my undergrad and my master's, I had about 5 years of working various low-paying part-time contract jobs. And some of them I really loved, but I started out like working at a call center and then doing reception and other things like that. I didn't really know what I wanted to do because there was no example of careers that didn't include like a full-time job. So I ended up going back to school for my master's in social justice education. I wanted to do social work, but I applied many times and didn't get into the social work program. And at that time, I was starting to identify as disabled. And I have thoughts, but social work programs require really high marks. And also I disclosed about disability. So I applied for a few years in a row and I didn't get in. And I think part of that was due to ableism, and then the barriers made by not having high enough marks because of ableism in my undergrad or because of my episodic disability. So I ended up kind of changing career paths and going into the Master's of Social Justice Education at OISE. And that was amazing. And one summer I worked actually at Realize, which is the first time I heard about episodic disabilities. And I was like, oh, wow, that's me. I can like relate to that. So I started doing activism around episodic disabilities, chronic health conditions, and disability more generally. After I worked at Realize, after I graduated from my master's of education, I worked at a shelter, and it was an amazing job. It was part-time, benefits. Did it have benefits? Yeah, it was like part-time permanent benefits, but it did require 8 to 10 hour shifts. And I was also commuting an hour and a half away from where I lived. And I tried to hang on to that job as long as possible because it was the first job I had had in my life where I could have some stability. But I ended up quitting that job because of ableism. I experienced a lot of ableism at that workplace. And And I ended up making a workshop called Unpacking Ableism, which is an anti-oppression workshop focusing on disability and ableism and intersectionality. And then I worked some part-time contracts here and there at University of Toronto, always like just a few months, maybe 6 months. And then the pandemic hit, and lots of jobs stopped. I was already not really having stability in my life. And when CERB came around, it gave me stability that I had never had in my life. And I was able to actually think about what I wanted to do instead of like living paycheck to paycheck. So I did a lot of self-reflection about like, what did I value in work? How could my various experiences intersect with each other and give me like sustainable, stable, secure employment. So I took a few different classes. I took a guidance counseling for adults class by Catherine Meisner. I took some starting my own business classes. I hired a business coach, did some soul searching, and I ended up launching a counseling private practice where I specifically offer mental health support for queer and trans folks with disabilities and chronic illnesses. And within 3 months, my schedule was full, and I was like making income actually. So I've been doing that for the past almost 2 years now. And so I have my counseling private practice, and then I run these workshops called, sorry, I'm going to sneeze, but then it stopped. And then I run these workshops for organizations called Unpacking Ableism, and they've actually taken off. And my co-facilitator and we have started a collective. So that's kind of my journey to self-employment, and I love it. I love working from home. I love setting my own hours. I love being able to talk about ableism and mental health and support my own community. When I was like watching the other presentations earlier today, I was like, why do we call things barriers or stigma when really it's a form of oppression? I think we're downplaying how serious ableism is. And yeah, so that was my kind of goal with doing my private practice. And now I do singles counseling as well as couples counseling. I've learned that I love doing couples counseling and other consulting work. So I'm going to pass it along, and then hopefully there's time for questions and more of a discussion.
Hi, everyone. My name is Salima. Thank you, Kate. It's been really nice to hear about your journey to self-employment, even though I kind of knew a little bit of it before. So as was mentioned before, I am a social worker and an artist, and a recovering journalist, I would say, and I'll start there. So when it comes to being self-employed and having episodic disability, I think it really hit me the most when I reached my dream, when I realized my dream of being a reporter. So I wanted to be a reporter since I was 10 years old, and I got there. In 2015 or 2014, I was awarded the Joan Donaldson Fellowship at CBC, and I was able to be a reporter in St. John's, Newfoundland, and work at the Fifth Estate and at the National Arts and Health Units in Toronto. The thing is, in 2013, I was also diagnosed with MS, which explained a lot of my energy fluctuations and kind of some other things. And I was still at the point when I was working at CBC where it was very very much in my process of mourning and acceptance of what I needed to do to take care of myself. And so during my fellowship, I had a MS relapse and I had incredible cognitive fog. And I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell my superiors. I didn't tell anyone because I thought it would affect my job in a journalism environment where Stephen Harper cut funding to CBC and there was already so little jobs and so many people had already been fired. And I thought I just needed to have, to keep that to myself. And finally, at the end, I was kind of asked like what was wrong with me. And at some point I actually had to tell people because I just couldn't focus anymore. And I realized after that that maybe a daily news environment wasn't exactly a good situation for me because the constant stress, the expectation of having a good memory capacity and energy and being reliable just weren't possibilities in my life anymore. And it was quite heartbreaking and was quite honestly a process of mourning to accept that that wasn't possible. And at the same time, I feel like it opened up a new wave of kind of being more accepting and leading with, what I need when it comes to employment. And so in terms of being self-employed, after that I transitioned to more freelance journalism, and I'm not going to lie, it was really challenging. I would take whatever contracts were thrown at me. I didn't really understand how to make my wage at all, and now I know a bit more about how to do that, which I'll share with you later. My methodology for doing that. But I think what happened is like recognizing that not standing up for myself or letting people know that I needed accommodations helped me understand and prioritize my relational skills a lot more and how I could structure care into my work, as well as like supported me in being an advocate for myself and for others. Because what I've learned is by modeling what access needs are and asking for them, it opens up that possibility for others. So for instance, like in social work school, I advocated for doing like voice recorded submissions instead of having to constantly write things. And a lot of my other classmates found that really useful as well. And I had a lot of good feedback from collaborators once I started saying like, listen, like, this is who I am, this is what I can offer, and this is what I need. So my first internship, for instance, at the Museum of Fine Arts for social work school in Montreal, my first meeting with my supervisor, I asked him, I'm like, listen, like, I'd really love to work here if I can. I know that that's not exactly self-employment, but I think the example is still relevant. And I let him know, like, listen, I have MS, it's an episodic disability. Sometimes I need to just rest. Is that something that you would be able to accommodate? And I came from a position of strength instead of like hiding any sort of needs that I had. And he was really appreciative, and he was completely okay with that. And he was grateful that I let him know ahead of time. So in terms of what's great, as Kate was saying, like managing my own schedule, choosing who I work with and how I work with them, and building my own projects and creating dream projects that I think if I had to constantly ask for permission to do that, I think it would have really like hurt my soul, honestly, like to have to hold myself back because someone said no. But I kind of carved my own path now, and it's going really well. I recently closed my private social work practice, which similarly to Kate's, it really expanded during the I opened it last year, and it filled up really quickly because being in the pandemic, I think has destigmatized a lot of mental health care, and so a lot of people reached out, and I closed it because I realized that I had a really big professional burnout, and along with the new medical treatment, that I couldn't offer what I would like to people in a predictable way, and just being able to accept that and be honest about that to clients. I was really touched by how people actually just understood that I didn't have to hide that, like, I was starting a new medical treatment and that I was feeling tired and burnt out, I actually let people know. And I think that they appreciated that I wasn't pretending. And so that's one thing that I've learned in the self-employment journey, I guess, is that that the transparency is really, really helpful. And so in terms of the challenges, I think that that it's a lot to manage. For me, admin work is really not my strength. And so what I'd recommend is like, like for instance, when I first started my private counseling practice, Kate was really helpful for me in terms of connecting me with other therapists for therapist groups and the English Language Arts Network in Montreal. Sorry, I just saw a couple of questions. I think we'll get to that a bit later. Sorry, I got a bit thrown off. And so like, for instance, through the English Language Artist Network, they have like a Stump the Arts Accountant workshop. So there's an arts accountant that was available that we could ask questions to help understand like what we should know as freelance independent artists to help us with our taxes. Yeah, so I think like being part of a community is really helpful and important because like something that can be really hard being self-employed is feeling alone or feeling like everything's on your shoulders. And I think if there can be a community or peers to reach out to or to ask questions to or to be supports in your life, it can be really helpful. And also knowing your worth, that you don't have to say yes to everything. And sometimes things just aren't a good fit, and it's going to save so much time and energy and spoons if you just say no. And I know that's hard because there is an aspect of precarity that's incredibly difficult on so many levels. I don't think we talk about that enough, of like how the precarity of self-employed work can be an incredible load on your mental well-being. But it is, as both an artist, journalist, counselor, there's always like this kind of like lack mentality, because there have been real moments in my life where I haven't had enough, and I've never really had insurance except when I was a student. And I milked that very much. So I tried to have any sort of things that I needed covered, saved until I was a student again, and then I would do that. And so, yeah, like, because burnout's also a real thing. And so the more you say yes to things that don't honor your time, your value, your skills, the less capacity that you'll have to kind of focus on the things that align with your values. Like Kate mentioned, taking that time, having that moment, which I know is an incredible, privilege as well, to be able to take a bit of time, like with the CERB and things like that. But having that time to align with your values and really take the time to think about like, okay, like, does this contract or does this kind of bit of work align with, why I want to do what I want to do? I think just slowing down for a minute is really helpful. I'm not going to talk too much more. I just wanted to share finally, like, kind of my formula for deciding if something's worth taking, or like offering kind of how I make decisions about wages and things like that. So what I do is I look at, like what my expenses are, including healthcare, because that's higher than people that have benefits and spouses or whatever that have benefits. And so I look at, what my health costs are, what my rent is, what it costs for having higher speed internet, technology, whatever. Like, I just put all of that together. And so that's like the first thing that I total up. And then I look at what are the hours I have available, like an honest idea of what it's like, not 8 hours a day. Like, there's no way I have the capacity to work 8 hours a day, but maybe like 20 hours a week of productive time at most. And so then I look at how many hours I have available. And then I think about like, what wage would I need in order to meet my expenses and have enough afterwards. And so I have like 3 different scenarios. And that's how I kind of think about like, okay, like, is this contract, like, if I look at how many hours I'm spending and how much time I have, it looks like I'm getting paid $10 an hour. And is that really something that honors my knowledge, time, skills? Can I ask for more? Where does the organization or whatever get money from? Can we ask for more? Is it, and it's flexible, right? Like, because charging more for people that can afford it, like on my counseling practice, for instance, I have a sliding scale of like, I think it was like 75 to 145. And the people who paid more helped to subsidize the lower costs. And so just think about like what honors your time and your skills and your energy, and know that saying no is okay too. It may feel hard at first, but in the long run, if you do have that capacity to say no to things that don't fit, then that can help you to kind of prevent burnout or taking on more than you can. So I think that honesty and transparency with yourself, with your clients, with your collaborators is something really helpful. And that's the end of my time.
Thanks very much to both of you. This was an extremely resonant session, and I think it really touched a lot of people. We are going to do a Q&A after the last session. We have a little bit of wiggle room at that point. So if it's possible for both Kate and Salima, as well as the presenters from the previous session, to stay on for a little while longer, we will go into Marianne Banton's session right now and then do a Q&A for our whole group at the end of that. All right. Hopefully that works for folks. If it doesn't, I will throw my email address into the chat, and anyone with questions can get in touch with me, and I will connect you with our speakers. Okay.